Coming up, the Brooklyn Nets have one preseason game under their belt. And after all the positives, we take a look at some of the areas that this team will need to focus in on, from offensive floor spacing to that new defensive drop coverage. We dive in coming up next.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, my friends, it is the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. Over there, you'll find Doug Norrie, owner-operator of DFSR, for all your daily fantasy sports rankings from DraftKings to FanDuel. He's got you covered. I'm Adam Armbrecht, preparing to kick off the New Jersey Devils season on the Devils Puck Luck podcast with Danny McDonough. We thank you for making us your first listen today. We're free on all those great platforms, and let you know today's episode is brought to you by Jace Medical. Empower yourself when you purchase a Jace case, providing you with a personal supply of 5 antibiotics that treat up to 50+ infections. Get yours today at jacemedical.com. That's JASE medical.com. And Doug, with one preseason of sample size, we were elated by the health and free-flowing form of one Ben Simmons and the starting unit appearance for Cam Thomas. But there are also some things that we expected this team would need to work on, and we want to make sure that we cover those before we get into the second preseason sample in the coming days.
Of course, and just as a reminder, we covered a lot of positives on yesterday's podcast. So if you are just catching this as your first podcast after the first preseason game, go check yesterday's podcast, because we did like 40 minutes, 45 minutes, at least on YouTube live, just praising all the different stuff that we saw for the first game. So I feel like I need to get the asterisk and the disclaimer out of the way first as we start to talk about not overreactions, but things that we were concerned about that were not necessarily alleviated in this first game, right? Like things that, I think that we've spent the offseason talking about, and some of those things came up a little bit here in this game. And the first one we can just talk about is the offensive spacing, right? And I mean, you can run through this. We kind of know the story of why this was going to be the case, right? Like the same positives that we took out of the Ben Simmons and Nic Claxton experience are unfortunately going to rear their ugly heads when it comes to offensive spacing, because neither of these guys can do it.
Yeah, and I didn't think we expected it to look any different on the offensive end. I think defensively is where you get really excited about that tandem. Now, in the first preseason game, obviously no Cameron Johnson. You get Cam Thomas in the starting lineup. But frankly, even if you swap those two guys out or do any other version of it, it's still going to be the same problem. You have two players that are non-shooters in Ben Simmons and Nic Claxton. Their offensive game is going to be attacking at the basket, some weak side opportunities off of the other players playing at a high level. But you need on-ball shot creation. And when you look at this court and you look at this team, Mikal Bridges, we know he's the best player on this roster. But then I think, Doug, we're going to mention him a couple of times. Didn't talk about him positively in the first episode, though he had a good game and we expect good things from him. Spencer Dinwiddie is going to be critical for the success of this offensive court and what he needs to do consistently to produce for them.
So one, like a somewhat alarming stat from this first game is that if you look at the starting lineup of Bridges, Simmons, Dinwiddie, Cam Thomas, Mikal Bridges, and Nic Claxton, that they took 12 total 3-pointers in their time on the court. Each, they played around 15+ minutes. But they took 13 total 3-pointers. 12 of them were taken by Dinwiddie and Thomas, right? So they really concentrate all the 3-point shooting to those two guys. Now, I don't think Mikal Bridges is not a candidate to only shoot one 3-pointer, for every 15-minute stretch. So I don't think that's going to be the case. But Simmons and Claxton are favorites to not shoot any for the whole course of the whole season. So you are getting zeros in terms of spacing right away from those two guys. And you could just see that spacing was an issue on the court, where there was like trouble for some of these guys getting open space, either to get by their primary defender or just to open up for good looks. And Simmons got to the rack a few times and Claxton did too. And that's going to be critical for them to really, really kind of push push that agenda as much as possible. But when you look at that 3-point distribution, which is to say there really wasn't one, it was just these two guys, that is troubling. And it's because opposing defenses are going to know they can ball deny those guys around the 3-point line like pretty aggressively and not have to worry too much about getting burned, right?
Yeah.
Now it's a little different with the Lakers. They have Anthony Davis guarding the glass, and it's going to be easier for him to stick in the paint knowing Claxton and Simmons are there. But this was a concern. You could kind of see it playing out in real time. It's like, hey, there are times that this is a struggle, and I want to say there is an asterisk for me on this shooting. If you look at Bridges was 0 for 1 from 3-pointer. I think that's an outlier. Dinwiddie and Thomas were combined 4 for 12. Now, a lot of Cam's production there came in that second half. And Dinwiddie's, if I'm just being honest about it, 2 of those threes were sort of the heave-ho variety at like the end of the shot clock that I don't think are candidates to go in often, right? Like, so
combined 8 to 12, right? Yeah, combined 8 to 12. Just to
they're combined 8 to 12. Sorry, yeah, they're combined 8 to 12. A lot of that from was Cam in the second half, and 2 of rephrase, and 2 of Dinwiddie's were not necessarily like super clean spot up threes off of awesome drives. They were like, oh, let me get this up before the shot clock expires, and they went in. Okay, they went in.
Yes.
But that's just not, they're not the shot. I don't want to be results oriented on that because those are not the shots you're looking for.
No, 100%. And to take it a step further, you have those 2 players combining, as you say, 8 of 12 from beyond the arc. Well, everybody else then goes a combined 7 of 20. Was it 7 of 27 from deep?
Mm-hmm.
Like so that's a sub 27% from beyond the arc. And this is some of the things that we talk about. Now, listen, this is even beyond the starting rotation and beyond the issues of Ben Simmons and Claxton starting together, but this is going to permeate throughout this roster as well. You look down into the bench and some of those other sample sizes. I'm not going to worry about Armani Brooks, who comes in late, but Lonnie Walker, only 1 of 5 from deep. Royce O'Neal had 2 very smooth-looking triples to start, but finished 2 of 5 as well. And Dorian Finney-Smith, 1 of 4. And all of this comes back to what we think is going to be successful around Ben Simmons and drawing the attention of the defense and finding these shooters. But remember, I mean, the Lakers are a good example of they're a good team. They're a big team as well. But there's going to be times when you can trust one-on-one matchups against Ben Simmons, against Nic Claxton as they enter into the paint. So if you can stay at home defensively, those Spencer Dinwiddie late shot clocks, hey, there's a guy in your face and it's time to pull or shut up. That's probably going to happen at least early on as they try to figure out that rhythm and make sure that they can be effective when Simmons and Claxton share the court together.
And look, they're missing theoretically one of their best 3-point shooters in Cameron Johnson too. 100%. So there is a guy out here that's going to play a lot of minutes who is a floor spacer, right? So this isn't a perfect 1-to-1 comp and I think there's room for improvement. And like I said, Mikal's been a really good 3-point shooter and he's a candidate to take more. I guess more of my thing is, I think we kind of understood that pairing Simmons and Claxton together would have its benefits, but there were going to be definitive drawbacks to it. And the drawbacks are going to be that there's just not going to be a lot of space for these shooters. I know Simmons is really good at finding shooters and he is, but it's pretty easy to scheme against staying home against the only 3 shooters in a lineup, basically, right? Because if you look, because in this lineup, they're just going to replace Cam Thomas with Cameron Johnson. So it's like, it's an upgrade, but it's not like they're replacing one of the non-shooters. We're replacing one of the guys who could shoot with another shooter. And I think that, it's pretty easy for defenses to get ultra aggressive around the perimeter on the 3 guys that can do it and be less aggressive around the 2 guys that can't and live with the results. And I think we're going to see a lot of that this year. I think we're going to see defenses that understand scheming against that is not too difficult, with the caveat to be like Simmons and Claxton are going to have to punish over and over and over again defenses kind of drawn off that way. But watch for this next time this group comes out. Like, watch what happens. Watch what happens on the perimeter defenders, on the 3 guys who can shoot. They don't have to. They don't have to move. Like, they just have to stay with those guys and face up, and it's going to make for pretty tough shot selection, I think.
Now, we're going to talk about the ball handlers and who's going to be handling the ball for the Brooklyn Nets, as well as a little bit of a new defensive style for this roster. But when we come back in, I also want to focus in on how that Ben Simmons and Nic Claxton tandem can impact other players in some of the sweet spots on the court that they want to work to. We'll get into that in just 1 second.
All right, before we get to that, tell you about our friends over at Jace Medical. In the Jace case, providing 5 life-saving antibiotics for emergency use. Look, You don't want to be caught off guard when it comes to medical stuff. You want to be able to get what you need to get yourself right. Sometimes it can mean difficulty getting a doctor's appointment. Sometimes it can mean just trouble getting to the pharmacy. Sometimes it can just mean supply chain issues. Like you just can't get what you need, even though you know it's very obvious that the thing that's going to make me better in this situation is just what Jace Case has. So just cover it early and make sure you are prepared. Jace Case handles everything. They're going to do the online evaluation for you. It's going to license pharmacy medication. It's delivered right to your door. Ongoing consultation and care with doctors, so you know you are covered completely. Look, we've all been in a case like this before where we just felt like we needed something, we needed to be able to get better, and we just needed what Jace Case can provide. You can get it yourself, and you can get $20 off these life-saving antibiotics from Jace Medical. Got to use the promo code Locked On at checkout at jacemedical.com. That's JASE medical.com.
All right, so talking all things Brooklyn Nets coming out of that first preseason game. And a reminder, if you want to extend the conversation with Doug Norrie and myself, you go to joinsubtext.com/lockedonnets. Like having a group chat with all your friends. Only me and Doug are in there, and we're stirring the pot, and you're throwing fire, and we're giving it right back to you. Free 14-day trial and less than a cup of coffee a month. Go check it out at joinsubtext.com/lockedonnets. And the last note before we get into the defensive side of the ball and some of the other areas that we're going to be watching for, and we've discussed this off season and I think came to fruition in that first preseason game. When Ben Simmons and Nic Claxton get into the teeth of the defense and they're looking for those kickouts, I think two things you kind of touched on. It's not difficult to scheme to defend against that. You're going to find that the teams collectively will be keeping an eye on where Ben Simmons is and where he's trying to get the ball to, right? So in a lot of ways, you'll be defending the passing lanes out of the paint when Ben Simmons gets in there as much as you are defending positionally where some of these shooters are going to be on the floor. The other area I want to bring up is that Mikal Bridges, and we saw this in last night's game in some of his opportunities, Cam Thomas showed this off too, mid-range. Guy loves the mid-range. And listen, you take those free, easy 2 points, it's a beautiful thing. But again, if you don't have that consistent perimeter threat and defenses want to clog the paint to prevent that Claxton and Ben Simmons penetration, now all of a sudden there's just more bodies there. And that's where I think you saw some of that clunkiness gets into Mikal's hands. And he's trying to find a very small pocket to get off some of these looks in that first game.
And look, it's just geometry, right? Like the court is only so big, and the further you are from players and defenders, the easier the shots are. Like, this isn't rocket science, and the more you have guys that's not a threat from, it reduces the space. The NBA, the nerds won with this stuff, man. Like this is what works. Like
nerds,
and
again.
you know. the spreadsheet folks just took a one look at this and figured out the spacing. But again, it can be overcome, and there are ways around it. But it's just something to keep an eye on. It's something that I think that we're going to see different variations of. I think we'll see Simmons and Claxton's minutes kind of chopped up a little bit, and you know they won't overlap all the time because I think they're going to see this as an issue. But it's just something to keep an eye out for. And the other thing, we can get into the next thing too. Go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, no, and again, too, it's like this is why they have some of these other players that we want to see how they play in preseason that can help spread this out a little bit. Somebody has to bubble up in here, and even some of the guys they have expectations for, which includes, by the way, Dennis Smith Jr. Wanted to come in, wanted to be a pest defensively, be that anchor point guard traditional style for the second unit. But it also unveiled the new methodology on the defensive end. Used to be switching every single thing. Now you want to be able to use some of that drop coverage. It requires these backcourt players, Spencer Dinwiddie, Cam Thomas, if he's going to be out there, Dennis Smith Jr. when he comes in. You got to fight over these screens. You need to be in the face of the perimeter shooters. And listen, is D'Angelo Russell the next coming of Curry here? I don't think so. But he's certainly displayed how players can get hot when you do not get in their airspace quickly enough. And that happened a lot throughout this game on, was it Tuesday night? Monday night.
One thing that killed the Nets at times last year was the switching scheme where they would switch Claxton out of a big, and with Claxton's fine. Like he can defend the perimeter. It's the problem was like what happens after that, right? Like when you switch out the big onto the smaller guy, and the Nets would just sort of get buried for that. And it was like they would get buried twice because they would get buried on the switch and then they'd get buried rebounding because Claxton is now just away from the rim and he's easily their best rebounder. We saw them try specifically with Claxton staying home on the AD screen and the Anthony Davis screens and trying to not switch, which means that when that's happening, the guard defender is going to have to fight over and stay on the level with the ball handler. And if you're wondering why D'Angelo Russell, like you said, looked like the second coming, is because that just didn't happen and all of his looks were wide open.
Yeah.
Right. And so, and that a lot of that times was Dinwiddie's assignment. I'm not sitting out here blaming Spencer Dinwiddie for this. It just happened. I think it just happened to be the case. The Nets are working with a new system here. I think it's going to probably be some growing pains around it. With all of this stuff, there's a give and take, right? If you're going to switch everything, you're going to give something and take something. If you're going to switch it up, you're going to give something and take something. I think that they have some of the personnel to be able to pull this out with guys like Dennis Smith Jr. and, to some degree Spencer. But I was encouraged that it was like, okay, hey, we're trying something new this year. This is going to be slightly different. We're going to play into Claxton's rim protection also, right? That's going to help us. But if you don't get over on these screens, or you just can't, if you're not totally attached to the hip all the way through, the looks can be pretty clean. So, and that's what ended up happening here specifically with the D-Lo ones.
And that's where I think, and I'll ask if you agree with me, that given the roster construction, you didn't go out and get a traditional big. Now, by the way, you and I talk about this all the time. These guys don't just exist. The Anthony Davises are not just wandering the streets waiting to be picked up to be this great two-way player that can anchor your defensive unit. So they are still an undersized team. But I just think that it makes sense also with Ben Simmons back and healthy. Listen, Nic Claxton, Ben Simmons, when they're on the bigs, you need to let them stay on that assignment because we saw them get beat up on the boards. That's still going to be an issue this year. So I think it makes sense to go into this year saying, guards, that's your job. You got to fight over. You got to stay on your marks. And we're going to have to live with it to some capacity, those results, knowing that if not, the way that we were exposed last season underneath the basket time and time again, it's just too critical. And listen, the 3-point percentages are going to be what they're going to be. But I'll take my chances on those misses and having Claxton be a part of the rebounding process rather than a Royce O'Neal, rather than Mikal Bridges having to fight through it. It's going to be a team effort, but I think at least to start the season, this is the path you want to go forward with to see if you can find a higher success rate defensively than we had a year ago.
Or just mix it up in more of an even distribution.
At least use it,
right? Where it's a threat to be used, and you're not really sure. I think last year it was very obvious what the Nets were going to do. Everyone knew. That was the sort of just the system that they were running. They wanted to switch everything 1 through 5, and they had the personnel pretty much to do it. Especially after the trade. They probably have most of the personnel to do it again this year, but they also have the personnel to not have to do it every time either. And so I think that's going to be the key, is that just varying it in terms of looks, having the defense not know what you're going to do. I think we will see more variations. I think we're going to see plenty of switching here, by the way. I think they're going to switch tons. It's just that last year they were really hesitant to do anything else, but I think now, especially with Day'Ron, and we'll see what are some of these other bigs that stick, but I think they just have to be able to do both, and having a point of attack defender like DSJ and guys like that will help with this some. It's just another thing that we just want to keep an eye out for.
Yeah, and I also think that in the positive light of the Ben Simmons, Nic Claxton tandem, well, these are two guys that do have that switchability defensively as well, right? And that's the positive you take of those guys sharing the court together. Now, if Claxton is going to switch out on the perimeter, well, you don't feel like you're being left naked with whoever has to pick up his assignment. It can be Ben Simmons, vice versa. So, yeah, there's value there, and I agree with you. The ultimate goal is here: try more. Don't do the one thing and get beat up consistently like it felt like they did last year, and it feels like the personnel is pushing in the right direction for that. Coming up here in a second, let's turn our attention really back over to the offensive end here and the ball handling. There's a reason why Trendon Watford caught our eyes in the late game of Monday night. It's because the Nets need guys that can move this ball up and down the court for them. Do they have enough? We'll dive in on that question coming up next.
All right, before we get to that, tell you about our friends over at FanDuel. Right now, you snap into action this NFL season, NBA too, with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Over on FanDuel, you're not going to beat this. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time than right now to get in on the action. The app is so easy to use, super wide range of betting options, spreads, player props, over-unders, some of those full season-long stuff that they got going up for NBA, like win totals, awards. It's all there for you on FanDuel. Visit FanDuel.com/locked-on. Kick off the NFL season if you're getting into it, NBA season as well. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL.
A good reminder as we conclude our episode, just looking at some of the areas that the Nets need to focus on as we work our way through the preseason. On our next episode, we'll be breaking down some of the quotes and takeaways from Ben Simmons, from Cam Thomas, and from Jacque Vaughn. So we're going to get a sense of where the players and the staff felt like everybody looked in this first sample size that we got to see. So be sure to tune in for that one on Thursday. But we wrap up today's episode looking at ball handlers. I mentioned it there at the end of the second segment, Doug. I mean, listen, Trendon Watford opened eyes and actually heard from some Portland Trailblazer fans saying, like, they saw this in his time in Portland to whatever level that he was being utilized. But I do think from a Nets perspective, anytime anybody, I don't care if you're 6'2", 6'1", like Dennis Smith Jr., or 8 feet tall, when you see a guy get the ball and bring it up the court comfortably, you go, hey, we may have something here. And I still think that that's going to be the question mark, whether it's in the starting unit or otherwise, because I'll use Mikal as the example in this. We know that he can get on ball and he can execute offensively, but I think you need to have as many possible components to thread across that unit and this can stay in motion and take somebody off the dribble. When things break down, do you have enough guys that can do it with the ball in their hands? That's going to be the question, I think, for the foreseeable future for this team.
Yeah, they just don't really have a ton of pick and roll ball handling on this squad. We've seen, Dinwiddie can get out there and can run pick and roll. He can run some ISO stuff. And he was actually a really high assist guy through the second half of the season last year. After that, though, who are their best ball handlers? It's pretty few and far between here, right? Like we have Cam, who's a natural scorer. You have Bridges, who can run some two-man stuff, but, it's not like you don't want him doing that for all your possessions. He's not like this like sort of heliocentric offensive guy. And then the other guys just have like holes in their game. It's like DSJ can't shoot, right? And there's just other problems with for shoot from distance. It'll be interesting to see how they use Watford. I think this is not really going to be something that's solved easily for them either. They're going to have to sort of make the best of a situation that they already were in. I don't think we saw anything from this game that makes you feel, if you were already worrying about the overall ball handling on the team, I don't think this game made you feel tons better about it. I just think that there's just going to be stuff. And I know people are going to say, well, yeah, Simmons, right? Simmons is the ball handler. I mean, he is, but see how many fingers it takes you to count the amount of times that Ben Simmons is going to face you up and really punish you like one-on-one off the dribble. He's going to try to get in the lane, but he's not going to punish you in pick and roll or anything like that. And so, because you can't shoot. Right. So I think this is just going to be something that we also see as possibly frustrating as over the course of the season is like, who are the offensive initiators when they're on the ball? They don't really have the dudes.
And the other missing piece off of this, obviously, starting rotation was Cameron Johnson. And while he is not known for this, he talked in the offseason, he got the contract in the offseason. I'll be curious, and not just for himself on ball, but I'll actually also be curious with how he plays off of Ben Simmons, right? So there is this other element that we're only going to get more of here over the rest of the preseason. It's still going to be the question, but I think you have to look at those guys, right? Like we're talking about a team whose highest paid players are Ben Simmons, healthy now, but non-shooter, Mikal Bridges, all-around two-way player, and then Cameron Johnson. And Cameron Johnson needs to step up and be the clear defined third best, I'll say, offensive player, right? Nic Claxton is in his own category. But if Cameron Johnson's not going to be all down game, then we're going to be sitting here saying, okay, now it's maybe too much Spencer Dinwiddie. That's not knocking him. It's just you start to ask more of other players that you really should need to if your best guys are playing up to par.
Yeah, and we talked about this on the offseason as well, just like trying to figure out what if Cam Johnson was going to be able to expand his game more into this range. It'll be really sort of critical to know that if he can. We didn't get a look at it here. And I still think, my excitement there is tempered to be sort of just in the realistic range around what he's ultimately able to do. It is a good sign that Cam Thomas is actually playing minutes because he actually solves some of this in terms of just being able to score, be able to create his own shot. Like they actually have very few guys who can create their own shots. I mean, who can? I mean, Mikal can to some degree. I mean, Mikal can. And then we're hoping that Cameron Johnson can. Dinwiddie can on the right kind of shot, right? Like it's got to be sort of the right kind. He can, it's not like he can sort of crush you sort of all around, but there's certain ISO stuff that he's pretty good at and pretty efficient at. But after that, really, it's like, who is it? It's not. They really don't have a lot of other guys after that that are just going to be that you're going to be like feeling really great about end the shot clock. You're going to be feeling really great about running 2-man pick and roll, like inverted pick and roll, like any of this stuff. Like they just don't really have it. And so I think we're hoping that everyone probably gets a little better and that the sum of the parts is greater than, or the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. But if you look at it just on a person by or player by player basis here, you're really hard pressed. Because like go right here, look at it this way. Go across to the Lakers, who they just played, and you're like, oh, hey, who can handle themselves sort of like in sticky situations? LeBron. We already know Reeves can. He ran pick and roll awesome with AD last year. We know D'Angelo Russell can. Right? There's 3 guys in the starting lineup that you already feel pretty great-ish about. And then not to mention Davis, who can just, if you get him in the post, like he's got a really just expansive offensive game. So just compare it to some of these other teams that are some of the contenders and just look at the difference. And the Nets, while we like the players they have, they just don't have players like that can get themselves out of, like, break glass in case of emergency, late shot clock stuff, or 2-man pick and roll, which you kind of need to be able to do to be of a certain class in the NBA.
And this is the bad dose of medicine, but it's when the Nets brought in the players they did, right? To see if they can collectively fill these gaps. There's going to be bad stretches, but let's see how that develops as we move along.
Yep. All right. We're going to get out of here. Like always, a couple things you're going to do here. Super easy. You're going to like and subscribe wherever you're listening to the podcast. Bang. That one's free. You're going to go over and you're going to subscribe to YouTube. So you know that when we're going live after games all season long, we'll be live on YouTube. Extra stuff's just happening on YouTube. That one's totally for free. And if you want to just do a couple bucks a month for joinsubtext.com and get in on the one-on-one conversation with Adam and I every single day talking Brooklyn Nets basketball, you go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnNets. Free trial. So you just test it out. No downside there. You get the free trial. You get there for a couple weeks. You guarantee by the numbers here, everyone wants to stick around. So we think you'll be part of the group too. So joinsubtext.com/LockedOnNets.
My fellow nerds and I will retire to the nerdery with our calculators. That's Richard Hayden, a.k.a. David Spade from Tommy Boy.
One of the all-time great poets. We'll be back again tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.
Basketball. Richard, basketball.